7 Massachusetts Bay colonists you should know. You may be familiar with the Pilgrims and the story of Plymouth Colony, including the Mayflower, Plymouth Rock, and Thanksgiving. However, the area that would become the state of Massachusetts was also home to another important colony in early U.S. history, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Unlike the Pilgrims, who were separatists seeking to escape perceived tyranny and corruption, the Massachusetts Bay Colony played a significant role in shaping the early American experience. John Winthrop. John Winthrop was without question the leading Puritan figure in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Born into England's gentry, he lived a life of privilege as a country squire, but grew deeply devoted to Puritan beliefs, convinced that God had chosen him for salvation. During the voyage to New England in 1630, Winthrop delivered his famous sermon urging the colonists to join together in covenant with God to build a city upon a hill, a model for the world to see. Beloved by many as a fatherly leader, elected governor 12 times between 1631 and 1648, Winthrop nevertheless faced growing resistance to his strict system, which stressed both community discipline and individual responsibility. Suspicious of challenges to his authority, including proposals for a representative assembly, he guarded Massachusetts' religious and political orthodoxy. Though not a petty tyrant, figures such as Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, both banished under his leadership, might have disagreed. Thomas Dudley. Second only to Winthrop in influence was Thomas Dudley. Like Winthrop, he signed the Cambridge Agreement of 1629, pledging with other shareholders of the Massachusetts Bay Company to relocate to New England if the colony's government was transferred there. Dudley sailed with Winthrop on the Arbella in 1630, later serving 13 terms as deputy governor and 4 as governor. He was also instrumental in founding Harvard College. Anne Bradstreet. At just 16, Dudley's daughter Anne married Simon Bradstreet, and 2 years later she followed her parents to New England. While raising 8 children, Anne found time to write poetry. Unbeknownst to her, her brother-in-law took her verses to England, where they were published in 1650 as the 10th muse lately sprung up in America. Although her early work echoed the style of her time, her later poems reflected both her spiritual development as a Puritan and her exploration of personal themes. Her poems sequence contemplations, written for her family and unpublished until the 19th century, eventually earned her critical respect, elevating her from a historical footnote to a poet of lasting importance. In 1956, John Berryman honored her with his long poem, Homage to Mistress Bradstreet. John Cotton. John Cotton became one of the most influential ministers in Massachusetts Bay. Persecuted in England for his nonconformist views, he emigrated in 1633. Even before leaving England, he inspired Puritans preparing to depart by comparing them to God's chosen people and affirming that it was divine will for them to settle the New World. In Boston, he served as teacher of the First Church from 1633 to 1652, shaping much of the colony's religious life. John Harvard. John Harvard, a graduate of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, 1631, earned his master's degree in 1635, married in 1636, and sailed to Massachusetts the following year. He briefly served as assistant pastor in Charlestown before dying of tuberculosis less than a year later. Though his life was short, his gift of half his estate and his book collection to a new school in Newtown, later Cambridge, gave it both resources and a name, Harvard College, which would grow into Harvard University. Roger Williams. Roger Williams brought a radical edge to Puritan dissent. Arriving in Boston in 1631, he rejected fellowship with Anglican-leaning Puritans. After briefly joining the Separatists in Plymouth, he returned to Salem but soon faced charges for his dangerous opinions, including his insistence that land could only be justly acquired from native peoples and that magistrates had no right to regulate religion. Banished in 1636, Williams purchased land from the Narragansett and founded Providence, which became the nucleus of Rhode Island, a haven for religious dissenters, including Quakers and Anabaptists. Anne Hutchinson. If Roger Williams challenged Puritan church-state unity, Anne Hutchinson struck even deeper at the colony's religious core. Hosting meetings in Boston to discuss sermons, She emphasized inner spiritual experience over external obedience to ministers and laws. Her challenges to clerical authority and accusations of rigid moral legalism led to charges of antinomianism. Tried in 1637, she was convicted of slandering ministers, banished, and later formally excommunicated. Like Williams, she relocated to Rhode Island, continuing to live out her faith apart from Massachusetts orthodoxy. The Lost Colony of Roanoke. The Lost Colony was an early English settlement on Roanoke Island, in present-day North Carolina, that vanished sometime between its founding in 1587 and the return of its governor, John White, in 1590. Seeking permanent trading outposts, Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored expeditions. Beginning in 1584, an initial colony in 1585 was abandoned after conflict with native peoples. In 1587, about 100 settlers under White tried again. White returned to England for supplies, but delays caused in part by the Spanish Armada kept him away until 1590. When he finally returned, the settlement was deserted. The only clues were the word Croatoan carved into a fort post and the letters Crow etched on a tree. Theories suggest the colonists may have been killed by native groups or assimilated into local tribes, but no definitive evidence has ever been found. The fate of the lost colony remains one of America's oldest mysteries.